This is Cookie Pocket. This podcast is about film. Episode 46, right? Man, we're chugging right along, aren't we?
We are indeed.
We are here to discuss The Pianist. And The Pianist is a 2002 biographical war drama film, directed and produced by Roman Polanski. I am already controversial now. Adapted from the autobiographical book of the same name, and considers the experiences of Władysław, yeah, there we go, Spielman, a Polish Jewish pianist and composer played by Adrian Brody, from the Nazi German invasion of Poland to the war's end, and how he's able to survive the Holocaust. The film also stars Thomas Kretschmann as Captain Wilhelm Hosenfeld, who kind of shows up at the end. Spoiler. Amelia Fox as Dorota, Frank Finley as Samuel, Maureen Lipman as Edwarda, Ed Stoppard as Henrich, Julia Rayner as Regina, and Jessica Kate Meyer as Helena. All of them are in the beginning. That's all of his family. So I guess before I start off by saying anything, obviously this is covering a very controversial Well, it's not very controversial, I guess, but it's a very sensitive topic amongst most people, considering the Holocaust. And I've also stabbed myself twice with this double-edged sword by also having a film directed by Roman Polanski.
Yes.
So I have to iterate two things. The first thing is that we're separating the art from the artist, and we're also separating the art from the subject matter, unless it pertains to the actual quality of the film. So I just want to reiterate that we're talking about the film, and we're having fun here because we like to have fun, and we're talking exclusively about the film, okay? So if any jokes or anything slip out, it has nothing to do with the Holocaust, obviously, and it has nothing to do with Roman Polanski as a person. It's merely the quality of the film and the quality of his direction. So just want to start off by that. But how did you guys think about the film?
I think that's well said, Mitchell.
Thank you.
So I would say that I think this is a great film. I particularly, Christian and I both mentioned this in our reviews, but I particularly like how it addresses the Holocaust, kind of this very big, momentous occasion, sounds too singular, but time in history on a very personal level. The film is mostly framed in medium shots and close-ups. It's the very kind of familial, individual story of this time. How are we going to pay for dinner? What are we going to do with the table? Where am I going to get work? It deals with these questions of kind of how life goes on while history is happening. And there are big, important historical things that happen in this movie, but when they do happen, they're framed on a pretty small scale as well. We focus on one corner of a street, the view through one specific window, and it's all about kind of that personal story of this pianist, who I think is played brilliantly by Adrian Brody. I think he totally deserved the Oscar that year, which he did win, because I think this is the type of performance that could be a very, like, look at me, aren't I an actor performance. It has a lot of those qualities of, like, I'm gonna get really frail and lose a lot of weight and portray somebody who doesn't speak a lot in their situation, but he always seems real. He never seems like somebody putting on a costume or doing a performance to draw attention to himself. He always seems like a real person suffering in that situation, and I think that's great. So 4 out of 5. I think it drags a hair, and I do mean a literal hair, like the tiniest bit in the middle, and there are a couple visual effects shots that aren't great, but other than that, I think this is a fantastic film.
Christian.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with Zach. I also gave this a 4 out of 5.
Wow.
And I found myself as a viewer immediately and distastefully and unnecessarily comparing this to Schindler's List, because I had just seen that like 10 or so days before this, and that did make this harder to watch, I think, and not just, maybe it's because I'm numb to how awful the events are.
You're welcome.
Because of how much I've been pummeled with it on screen.
You're welcome.
But this is obviously a great film for all the reasons Zach said and more. And I did say in my review that this feels like an intensely personal account of this pianist and his life, so much so that in certain moments, especially in the first half of the film, I was kind of wondering, like, does this scene really need to be here? Do we really need to see him talking to this guy? And I pretty quickly realized the answer to that question was yes, or at least that every scene is very deliberately included because you're being led through his life. And the establishment of the status quo and some events that you might see as mundane or unnecessary in another film serve as really important anchoring points for when everything goes to hell. And just generally gives you a stronger sense of his character and his surroundings. And so everything here feels very deliberate and intentional. And the music, when played and included in the film, is beautiful and stunning and suitable to the moment. And Brody is totally believable as a musician and as a person, like Zach said. He's not giving a showy, like Joaquin Phoenix type performance. And I think Joaquin Phoenix is a great actor. Is a terrific actor. But it's just a very different game. And I would go so far as to argue that what Brody does here is harder than just going over the top all of the time in a movie. So in that sense, the performance is very, very impressive. I give this a 4 out of 5. I think if I watched it another time, I might have rated it even higher. And I was thoroughly impressed on pretty much all accounts.
I completely agree with both of you. Look at us coming together. Of course, on this film and nothing else. I very much enjoy this film, and it's very not enjoy in the, you know what I mean. I'm not even going to explain myself.
Yes.
It's highly intriguing, and it really the things that stick out to me that you don't really see in a lot of films very often is the impact of kind of not just like immediately killing people. Like, I don't want to make too many comparisons to Schindler's List because we'll talk about that later. But, like, just kind of, like, going from status quo and just instantly, like, ripping that away. Just instantly taking somebody's humanity away by killing them or torturing them or just treating them like dirt. It's really the humiliation. Like, the humiliation, particularly early on, is way more effective than you would expect it to be. Like, just making them dance and stuff like that is, like, it's not just, like, the impending doom that you know is going to happen. But it's also, like, just like, you know, just seeing somebody treat somebody else like that is like, just like your senses are already tingling when it comes to seeing how horrific people can be. And it's just like, you know, it sounds like, oh, they're just making them dance, but it's like, it's more than that, you know. It kind of emphasizes the value of the racism and, you know, the anti-Semitism and how deeply rooted it was. And how many varying levels of it was. It wasn't just people just constantly killing people. It was like brutal suffering and constant just humiliation at every single turn. If you didn't die, then you severely suffered. If you didn't severely suffer, then you're humiliated. So it's kind of just like it's complete, like you're completely screwed. Like there's no, like Adrian Brody could just stand still and stare at the camera for 30 minutes, and I would be like, man, he's hopeless. Like his life is terrible, right? And very much lent to his performance. So I gave this a 4 out of 5, and I think his portrayal of how the memoir is, you know, supposed to be, at least, is pretty accurate. Like the accuracy I'll talk about later also, but like just Wladek's like constant, you know, encounters with luck are more effective than you would expect. And some people would think like, oh, it's like, you know, it's an extra circumstance. Kind of like major criticism of Schindler's List was that these are like, you know, extraordinary circumstances where everyone else kind of just was, you know, suffering or died, and you know, the regular systematic things. So this is like a highly ideal situation, which only makes the impact of the film a lot greater. Thinking how ideal this was and how horrific his life was in this moment, even though he survived. So, yeah, I gave it a 4 out of 5. I think it's a fantastic movie, and, you know, I agree with the dragging. There's some really weird moments that feel out of place and kind of just last a little bit too long, and I think, you know, Polanski gets a little bit too into himself in those moments. But my first question is pertaining to Adrian Brody's performance. So he lost 31 pounds, got rid of his apartment, sold his car, didn't watch television, and learned to play the piano. So that is him playing the piano the entire time. Which I did not believe the first time I saw this. And he was specially chosen by Polanski after meeting him in Paris after 1,400 auditions. And the film was almost entirely from Wladek's perspective. So how is Brody's performance, and how much of the film's weight is carried by his acting ability, do you think?
I think a lot of the movie is carried by him. He really impressed... So something I like about... I'm going to kind of talk about the character a little bit as well here. Something I like about the film is that it's not... his character is not portrayed as like a hero or somebody who's quick-witted or anything like that. I kind of think this movie has a bad tagline, because on the poster it says something like, music was his art, survival was his masterpiece, which I kind of think that goes against the point of the movie. Because I think the point is that survival wasn't his masterpiece at all. Like, the reason he survived was almost entirely dumb luck and the kindness of others, and it's quite rare that he actually manages to make it by in this film by his own ingenuity. There are only a handful of occasions where that happens, and I think Adrien Brody portrays that really well, because he does, as the film goes on, get more and more downtrodden. At the beginning, he's sort of this kind of, upright, respectable man. He's cracking jokes. There's a feeling that he's kind of high standing in his community. And then you get to scenes towards the end where he's just limping around, haggard, trying to open a can of cucumbers, or maybe they're pickles. There was some conversation over what they might be before this episode was recorded. But you really get a sense of that progress. And the piano thing astonished me. I know there was a conversation Christian recently had about Ryan Gosling learning to play the piano for La La Land.
Good for him.
Yes.
Yes, which is impressive. But I think Adrien Brody learning the piano to this extent for this movie kind of impresses me more. Because he plays to such a level in this movie that I legitimately thought, like, oh, well, these have got to be, like, original recordings. Like, there's no way just an actor learned piano from scratch to play this. There's no way those are actually his fingers playing that. Yeah. But they are, and it's amazing. He vanishes into this role.
Yep.
I don't want to get into that debate because I think it would be a major disservice to the discussion we're trying to have.
No, that wasn't me trying to start a debate. It was just me calling to a similar thing with a more recent performance.
Okay, well, they're both very impressive men and actors and, and pianists. And no, I feel like maybe 30 minutes or so into this, I was kind of unsure about Brody. I feel like maybe we had built him up a lot because I know we had discussed that we were going to be watching this for the podcast beforehand, and how he won the Academy Award for it. And it wasn't even the scene which is shared on like every conceivable cinema Instagram account where he's walking through the streets crying. That's not the turning point for me. The turning point is like after he grows his beard and he's like haggard and he really is just like a shell of himself at that point. And in that sense, it's really the product as a whole that makes it so impressive, rather than any one moment or turn in his character or anything. And it's certainly astonishing that he learned to play the piano at this level, and a major credit to his dedication. And I didn't really think it was him, but at the same time, had they used a body double, I didn't notice. So I figured whatever they did, it was effective, but major credit to him for learning it. And that's always the preferable route, I think, when possible, for a character that is a musician.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you. Like, the first 30 minutes, it's like, honestly, anybody pretty much could have played him. I'm not to go to that extreme, but like, there wasn't anything particularly special about him at that point. But that is kind of inherent in a biographical film anyway, because they kind of come out of themselves, coming of age kind of thing happens to them early on. They're kind of a regular person, and you get to see, now, like Zach had said, I was going to say, usually they would become doing extraordinary things, but in this case, the extraordinary things are happening around him, and he has to deal with the things happening to him. And that's why I think the setting of the Holocaust works perfectly, trying to convey those themes, conveying the usual themes with that, and also just conveying the actual events that happened, because it's actually insane. Like, a lot of the stuff you would think are just inserted, like, for Hollywood stuff, like in Schindler's List, a lot of, like, when he what's his name is using the guns, and he's like trying to use both pistols and they both jam. Obviously that was pure symbolism, pure Hollywood thing. In this, there's almost nothing like that, and every single like major thing that happens to him, he literally happened to him in real life. So Władek is a very compelling character in real life as much as he is in a film. So I think Polanski does like an amazing job trying to choose this story and pretty much just being as adherent as possible to the source material, like Christian likes. And yeah, I think Adrien Brody does a phenomenal job, and it really comes across, as we kind of all said, towards the end. He's just an emaciated shell of a man trying to get by through anything he possibly can, and I think that's portrayed greatly. And I wouldn't really change much about that. And yeah, also his family kind of just being gone. Like, his entire family dies. And
I thought that was effective, though. The last we see of them is just, like,
yep.
No, and then they're on the train and they're gone. And there's no, like, conclusion, no happy ending. They're just, as far as he knows, dead. But, like,
fully agree.
Perhaps he'll never know. Like, yeah.
Yep, and then the progression with like the coloring and the costuming and everything like that. But yeah, I wouldn't choose anybody else. I think Adrien Brody really, was the guy, and I wouldn't change anything else about him. But considering Polanski, he was a survivor of the Holocaust himself, and his mother was murdered at Auschwitz, and his dad survived another camp. But Polanski tried to make the film as faithful as an adaptation as possible, with additional inspiration coming from events that happened to him while he was a boy during the war, as well as hours of archival footage that he went through with the screenwriter. Do you think that the incredibly raw and relentless portrayal of historical events that occurred surrounding Władek's experiences, do you think it hurts the film's momentum or impact at all? Or do you think it's appropriate considering the subject matter and his experiences that Polanski wanted to portray? If that question makes sense.
Yeah. It does.
Okay.
I think it's necessary. I think in terms of momentum, the only thing that moments that are more focused on the Nazis, I feel like the only way that might disturb any momentum is if you're really focused on Brody's character for the whole time, and then you break it up with that. But at the same time, breaking up those moments of his character is kind of necessary, I think, to keep an audience member focused, or maybe not necessary, but at least effective. And it's important to build up the setting as much as you build up the character, because the surroundings are super, super important to everything that he goes through, and not just like physical location, but surroundings in terms of the other people and the events and the time. And so in terms of how effective they were, I think I may have mentioned before, I felt awful and numb the whole time, which is, I think, a byproduct of how much of this material I've consumed lately, but also a likely response for many people just in general because of how brutal much of it is. So, but by that measure, I would say it's effective, because that's an appropriate response to the events depicted.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I would agree. I think it's interesting, Christian, that you said this film kind of not left you numb, but that you were numb while kind of taking it in, because I think I was. This movie doesn't really numb me quite like Schindler's List does. I think because Schindler's List is just so massive, and it tries to tell such a huge story, it kind of does leave me numb. This, I think, kind of is, if we're looking at it from like a narrative perspective, I think is kind of a better film. In the way that it kind of leads you on through the perspective of a character. I think it's more of a story that you can become invested in rather than just history presented to you. So in that way, I don't really think that I think everything throughout this film is effective, because you stay with him throughout, and like I mentioned, it's the smaller stories, and maybe if this were about a more obscure historical event, that wouldn't be as effective, but. I mean, we all know about the Holocaust, and we all know about World War II, so we can get those little glimpses of this is happening now, and this is happening now, and we'll still understand the context, because we know how the war went along, and we know how the Holocaust progressed, so we can see little flashes from a character's perspective without being confused. So I think it works throughout, individual perspective or not. I think it's a different way to approach a Holocaust film, but I definitely still think it works, and perhaps in a way that allows an audience to become invested a bit more than other Holocaust films do, I think.
That makes sense. I think the event's so immense that an individual approach and a more broad approach, either one is really quite effective, because the heart of it are the events depicted, not as much the manner in which you depict them, at least in this case, I think.
And Schindler's List. Well, that's my last question, by the way, about Schindler's
really?
List. Yes, yes. But I think trying to it wasn't just an account of Oskar Schindler's, actions and how it affected everything. It was more about Spielberg's portrayal of the Holocaust and the way that he wanted to portray the Holocaust. This is literally just Polanski trying to portray Władek's experiences in the Holocaust. So I don't want to draw any crazy comparisons, but it's like the Christmas Die Hard, Thanksgiving Paul Blart situation. And Polanski is entirely focused on Władek's experiences, and I feel like inherently that has issues to me. And the reason why is because I've seen him look out the window like 30 times, and I know that's the only way he ever looked at events happening, but I feel like that kind of I grow numb to that kind of that overuse of that shot, and kind of the overuse of just having a still camera and having things happening like in the streets and things like that. I think it works when when the scene is inherently impactful, like the wheelchair scene and all of the civilians dying. I feel like that was a perfect scene. I think that has tons of impact by itself. But when the Jewish are kind of resistant, the Polish Jews are resisting, and they have the blow the hole in the wall, and then I'm sure, Zach, like the effects were really bad with the Panzerfaust hitting the side of the building and everything like that, and there's a hospital and stuff. That whole scene kind of just felt dragged out. It didn't really feel like we had to see all of that happening. I feel like that could have been cut down a lot.
But I was fine with that, but yeah.
But in my opinion, I just feel like that's kind of just inherent to how Władek may have looked at that situation. He might have heavily described it in his book for like 30 pages or something like that.
Yeah.
And trying to heavily adhere to the source material may have caused that. I don't necessarily have like a problem with it, like a huge problem with it. It doesn't really mess up the whole experience for me. But I do feel like it can become an inherent issue when you're trying to make a biographical film and trying to be as adherent as possible. So, but for the most part, like almost all the time, it works perfectly fine and it's really effective to me. So we've been talking about Schindler's List already, but Spielberg attempted to get Polanski to actually direct Schindler's List in the early 90s, but at the time he thought it was too harrowing of subject matter to try to do that. I guess he might have seen the success of Schindler's List and thought this was a good idea after that. But in terms of emotional impact and what happens with Oskar Schindler compared to Władysław Spielman, which of the two films is more effective in their own goals? And which one do you prefer? I have to drop that bomb, I'm sorry.
A truly impossible question. Go ahead, Zach.
Yeah, I think, I kind of hinted at this earlier. I kind of think I prefer The Pianist. I think you can really tell... I just want to say, I think you can really tell from the way the movies are directed and told that one is an account of a man who has read about and heard about the Holocaust and been supremely affected by it and wants to tell a story about it.
Yeah.
And one is told by a man who was there. I think you can really tell from the way the two films are made that the differences in those perspectives. And I do think that Spielberg, he really restricts himself in making Schindler's List, but I do think to a certain extent he does kind of Hollywoodize the Holocaust. He turns it into this huge presentational thing about the entire event. It's about Oskar Schindler, like you said, but that's just kind of an envelope to deliver a much bigger and much heavier story. And I think Polanski is really telling a much smaller story that happens to be set within the Holocaust and is kind of working through his own feelings of self-loathing in the process, because you mentioned that his mother died, and I think you can see through this film that there is a certain amount of guilt that he feels about that, and I think he projects himself onto Spellman here, kind of showing him as not a hero, not somebody who really had the skills or the wits to survive and kind of did by dumb luck. And I think part of him kind of thinks, why did I live and my mother died? And I think he's working through that in the film. So as somebody who kind of prefers smaller, more specific stories that are maybe told on a much more personal, individual level, I think The Pianist works better for me. That's not to say that Schindler's List is a bad film, but I think that it being bigger and it being more of I guess an epic tome kind of makes it less watchable in a way. It's a movie you experience rather than a movie you watch, I think.
Okay. How do I say this? I see where you're coming from, Zach, but I think it's important to be very, very specific with our language here. And while I agree that Schindler's List is kind of a massive Hollywood production in a sense, I think Spielberg treats the subject matter with immense care and sincerity and reservation, and does the absolute most he can to not be offensive or flippant about any of it. So I would, and I don't think that's what I don't think you were saying the contrary. I just want to make it abundantly clear. I think he handles the subject matter well, and despite how massive the production is, it never feels perverse or like it was made for entertainment.
No.
I gave Schindler's List a higher rating. I was more affected by it, probably, but it does have the notable advantage of having been watched by me first. If I saw The Pianist first, I'm honestly not sure which I might prefer. But in the same breath, I'll say I hope I never have to see Schindler's List again, because it is brutal. It is just brutal. I don't think any more needs to be said about that. They're both immensely successful films that I think pretty much anyone should consider seeing. So I guess I'd give the slight edge to Schindler's List. Liam Neeson's one of my favorite actors. So, but they're both amazing. Watch them both.
Yeah. I am always personally affected by Schindler's List a lot every single time I see it. It is probably my favorite film of all time. And I am a big fan of Spielberg, and I'm not a big fan of Saving Private Ryan. Okay, so yes. I'm a very big exception.
I'm not a big fan of Kingdom of the Crystal Skull.
Oh, there you go. Wow.
I'm not a big fan of 1941. So there, Spielberg, take that.
There's no way you can portray the Holocaust. The Holocaust is what it is. And there's different ways of portraying it, and I totally agree that these are two different ways of portraying events that happened during it. But in regard to like which one I prefer, I feel like it's generally more emotionally impactful and effective with the characters that are used in Schindler's List and what themes they represent, and kind of the two sides of the same coin kind of aspect they have with Goethe and Schindler. And just in general, I think portraying those events as visceral and widespread is generally doing the actual events more justice. But that's just my opinion. I can definitely sympathize with Zach's opinion, because the Pianist is also very person-focused and family-focused, Vin Diesel. And it is very... because you can contextualize and imagine what's happening, the horrors happening around him, the impact is a lot more, really, in my opinion, it comes from your imagination and what you would imagine is happening based on what you know of the Holocaust. That's really where the major impact comes, in addition to all of the things we already mentioned. So I do prefer Schindler's List. I highly recommend you watch both, though. This kind of goes into our final thoughts now. I highly recommend watching both. I think they're both very necessary. And definitely it's highly preferential. And they both go out to achieve different things, and they both do a great job achieving those things. So there we go. 5 out of 5 Schindler's List, 4 out of 5 The Pianist.
Yeah, I will say that despite my preferring The Pianist, I think that there are two different ways to deliver a Holocaust story, and I don't think that one is how you should tell all of them, and the other is you should never tell the story that way, because I think you need to focus on the events, but I also think you kind of need a movie like this to put you in them every now and then as well as like a singular person. My only real final thoughts on the film are I think I just wanted to acknowledge Frank Finlay, who I think does give a great performance as the father towards the beginning of the film. It's subtle, and it's not like he's a scene-stealing actor or anything like that, but Finlay was always a reliable character actor, and I think he does well in that part. Mm-hmm. And I also wanted to throw some credit on classic British character actor Cyril Shapps, who is only in this for one scene, but he gives a great little performance and shows a lot of the character traits that he showed throughout his career that made him such a likable actor. And this was his last performance as well, so a nice final tip of the hat from Cyril Shapps in his career.
Mm-hmm. Christian. Are you going to mention Thomas Kretschmann? Thomas Kretschmann was cool. Thomas Kretschmann did a great job.
You were scared he was in it so little.
Yeah, and he was very stoic and very disturbing, but also like very confusing to look at. You just have no idea what the man is thinking, and that's really effective. But anyway, go ahead, Christian.
Sorry, what was the question?
Final thoughts was the question.
Okay.
Final thoughts?
This is a great movie, and I feel like part of why I have less to say is because of how numb it left me. I keep saying that as if it's a bad thing, and it's not. I think it's a mark of how effective it was. So, maybe keep 2 watch lists, one for fun and one not for fun, and put this on the not for fun one, but still watch it anyway.
Good job. Yep. Yeah. All right. Well, that's it. We can go on to our bits and start with Week in Review.
Yes. So we can review this episode.
Go, Zach.
Yes, I'm taking the reins. I watched this literally right before we recorded. I finished the movie like 10 minutes before we started.
Yeah.
Climax by Gaspar Noé. If our listeners aren't familiar with this director, he's also directed films like Irreversible. He's known for making movies that are horrible, stress-inducing nightmares that will leave you very, very disturbed. And this movie is kind of similar. It's basically about a dance troupe who are having like a party after a successful rehearsal, and somebody has spiked the punch bowl with some bad acid, and this troupe proceeds to freak out in a major way. And there's some fantastic dancing in the film. It's kind of a unique movie in that there was basically no script. There was a general premise, and then the director basically said to all these actors who were mostly dancers and first-time actors, do whatever. And so the entire plot and character arcs and performances and relationships were all done through improv, and yet it totally works. Everybody feels entirely real in their interactions and the way they approach other people. And the dancing is just mesmerizing throughout. If you're somebody who is a dancer or who's interested in dance, I would really recommend this. Now, towards the second half, there's stuff that will disturb you and will freak you out and might be stuff that you don't want to watch. But I think throughout, the stuff that these people do with their bodies is just incredible. So it's a 4 out of 5.
Zach Garrigus 2021.
It's not for everyone. I certainly wouldn't recommend this movie to Nana, as we say basically every episode now. But I do think it's a really good movie. Nice. Climax, 4 out of 5. I recommend it. 2018 Climax, because there's a couple movies called that.
Nice. Well, I am all caught up on Family Guy on Hulu, so I needed to find...
Oh, no.
I needed to find a new TV show and stat. So I decided I'd pick up where I left off on The Queen's Gambit. Yes, Zach's very excited.
I love this show, yeah.
Yes, starring Anya Taylor-Joy, of course, one of our Cookie Pocket favorite performers.
Yeah.
Yes,
and it's an excellent show. If you have no investment in chess, you'll still be very interested in what's going on screen, because it is all about this character, and there's a very clear growth. If you're a character arc person, you will love this limited series, because that's like what this is. It's just like a really good character arc. I'm not quite finished with it. I think I'm either 4 or 5 episodes down, but each one is getting a little bit better for me. I watched the first 2 episodes a while ago and then stopped, and now I'm ready to binge it if I had more time in my day. So I'd recommend, once you get over that initial hump, you'll probably sprint to the finish. And it's on Netflix, so pretty widely accessible, I guess. And I'd recommend it to 50% of nanas.
Interesting.
You're not gonna go 60%? I think that's a 60% Nana show.
I'll go 55.
Okay.
I am going to talk about something that's not a TV show, but it's a video game, and the video game sequel as well, of which was marketed as "Your mom would not want you to play this." I'm not kidding. There's an entire marketing campaign that's like, "Your mom would not want you to play this." Dead Space 2. It's Dead Space and Dead Space 2.
Oh, no.
Okay. Dead Space is about Isaac Clarke, it's a billion gazillion years in the future, like 2,500 something, right? So not a billion gazillion, like a few hundred. And it is about things I can't talk about too much because I want to spoil it. But basically, he's on an engineering mission thing, and they have to visit this mining ship that recently, this is going to sound very familiar, by the way, a mining ship that went on a planet and found bad things on the planet, and then the entire ship had some bad things happen to it. So Isaac goes on the ship and discovers bad things happening on the ship, and he has to find ways to kill the things on the ship. And this follows the Alien trilogy formula, where Alien is great, Alien 2 is pretty good, somewhat controversial.
Alien 2 is great.
Focused more on action, right? Aliens. Like Dead Space 2. Alien, I'm using the 2 reference so I can compare easier. Aliens,
I see.
Okay,
yes.
I'm a simp too, Zach. All right. Alien 3, terrible sequel. Dead Space 3 is when EA went bad, so terrible sequel.
Okay.
But anyway, haven't even played it yet. But anyway, Dead Space is a survival horror game, so it's shut up, Christian.
It's in the
game. Dead Space, okay? Very, very horrific game. One of the most horrific survival horror games I've ever played, all right? Everybody's infected on this thing. There's a religion about the marker which creates all of them. Hard to describe, but basically the marker is this big thing that a religion was taught around called unitology that teaches it. So you have religious fanatics, you got people on the thing that are mad, you got the Earth government, Earth Gov, die Earth Gov, they show up in Dead Space 2. But anyway, highly recommend it for survival horror fans. I'm sure you've already played it if you're a fan anyway. So. How
is Clark spelled? Is there an E
Clark
on the
with
end?
an E, yep.
Oh, so it's Arthur C. Clarke and Isaac Asimov. That's cool.
Yes,
yeah.
that's the reference. Yep.
John Carpenter, we know you tune in every Monday and Friday. Make that Dead Space adaptation you've always been meaning to make.
It's very good. It's very good. And the HUD.
I know you play the game.
Yeah. and the HUD is integrated in the game, which doesn't sound like a lot, but seeing your health on your character and seeing the actual ammunition on your, not even guns, they're engineering like tools. You use a plasma cutter as your main weapon. So the whole ship is scary. You instantly can get like your head cut off or something. Like the whole place just sucks. All right, and that's what makes the game fun.
Head.
Yeah. So, yep. I guess we go on to the rundown now, right?
We do.
Yes.
Huzzah! All right.
Yes, this might be a more denotative rundown than most, but here we go. We say things to Zach, and Zach gives us a number. Mitchell, are you ready?
Yep, and Zach's not going to get in trouble about any of these because we chose ones that are not bad.
Okay, yes. Thank you.
And 3, 2, 1. Alan Z.
Archive footage.
2 out of 5.
Money in the Violin.
4 out of 5.
Trying to use psychology.
3 out of 5.
Adrian Brody.
4 out of 5.
Being in the army and not being a socialist.
3 out of 5.
Roman Polanski's direction.
4 out of 5.
Musicians not making good conspirators.
3 out of 5.
Musicians being too musical.
4 out of 5.
Celebrating New Year's Eve.
3 out of 5.
Air piano.
4 out of 5.
Playing like an angel.
3 out of 5.
Snow.
4 out of 5.
Survival tactics.
4 out of 5.
Beard in Act 2.
3 out of 5.
Can of pickles / cucumbers if you're Zach.
4 out of 5.
The Merchant of Venice.
3 out of 5.
Wearing a coat to not be cold.
4 out of 5.
Cooking potatoes.
3 out of 5.
Flowers, pots, and pans.
4 out of 5.
And we have a considerable amount of leftover time.
Okay.
Excellent. We're going to leave that, and that's it.
I'm going to use this leftover time to just say the air piano scene is great. It might be my favorite scene in the movie.
Yep.
Ah, yes.
He was playing that thing. He was playing that invisible piano. It was crazy. Yeah.
The scene where he actually plays in the rubble is great, but I think that air piano scene might be better for me.
Yeah.
Interesting. Very interesting.
All right. Well, we hope we're good. We didn't do anything bad, guys. Yay! That was a great episode. And Twiggy Pocket. This podcast is about film, episode 46. And who is next? Cristiano.
It is Cristiano, yes.
Go.
We're going straight back into World War II with our next one.
Oh, no.
We are.
But this is one of my all-time favorites and widely regarded as one of the best films of all time. We are going to be discussing Casablanca, directed by Michael Curtis and, of course, starring Humphrey Bogart and Ingrid Bergman. And this is a tremendous film. I think it is one of those that literally everyone should see at least once in their lives. And I look forward to discussing it in detail with you two next.
Yeah. I haven't seen this movie since like 8th grade when I watched it on Turner Classic Movies. So
you're going to love it, Zach.
Yeah,
I can't wait.
I totally forgot the whole thing. I don't remember what happened.
Oh, this is good. This is going to be such a good episode.
This is good, yeah.
All right. That was episode 46. I always forget. I don't know why. All right. Bye, guys.